Hello everyone, welcome back to the Yu-Gi-Oh video on the channel. Episode 62 of Go Rush came out earlier this week, and there's not that much I want to talk about, so let's jump in. So remember I said I thought this week's review was going to be pretty long? Well, it's not. This episode is essentially a recap and setup episode, which, fair. We do get a few things though, and I guess they're going to answer the big question next week. But back to this week's episode. It starts with a scene from Sevens of Yuka-chan defeating Otis, goes into the Go Rush theme song because it's still Go Rush, and then cuts back to the Odos. Yuhi and Yumu find out that it's the future, and Mutsuba Town has transformed into Goha City, Yuka-chan's home. They also find out that there's not really aliens in this time period, which I didn't understand why they were asking until Yumu pointed out to me. They're fighting Phaser and the MIK in their time period, and Phaser wants to remove all the aliens from Earth, so they want to know Phaser won. There are some lines where it's like, there's not talking cats in this time period, so we should definitely try to not stand out. Guess what happens immediately? It's talking cats! Honestly, out of all the characters from Sevens to run into, Schrodinger's probably one of the better ones. Since you already heard them talking, Yuga-chan explains what's going on. Schrodinger calms down and they talk, and Yumu and Yuhi want to see the city's records because they still want to know what happened. So I guess the humans can understand them after all, even in their cat forms. Also, Yumu says this, which he already did, and also he's standing right there. Sitting right there? Whatever. He's literally right next to you. Schrodinger takes him underground to Nail's hideout, the Garden of Providence, which, now that I'm thinking about it, is probably the underground alien area. Yuhi and Yumu also say these lines, which almost certainly refer to this person, who works under the Luke. So, this person over here is Nail's ancestor, assumingly. They discover that nothing has changed at all, despite Yuga-chan forming Rush Duels in the Go Rush time period, so Yuga-chan's kind of depressed. And Yuhi and Yumu are a little depressed as well, because they're like, so we were too worried about UTS to consider his feelings. Our bad. Oopsie. Honestly though, I'm surprised they don't run to Nail, or at least Sebastian. They were in Nail's hideout and they just didn't see him. We already kind of knew that Yuga-chan was reluctant to create Rush Duels in the Go Rush time period because he didn't want to mess with the timeline, but we do learn that the reason he eventually did so was not because Zuijo forced him. I mean, Zuijo stole it and locked him up, but that's not the reason. He recreated Rush Duels because he overheard Denoa Muta talking and realized that the only way the Belgiarian War would end is if he did recreate Rush Duels. So Udius, Zuijo, Denoa, Muta, and every single person on their entire planet, and whoever the enemy was, should be very grateful. Yuka-chan saved their lives, or their sanity in some cases. Dying and being revived, especially multiple times, cannot be good for their mental health. Oh, and one more thing. While captured by Zuijo, Yuka-chan created a system to stop his fear of ladybugs. I think it worked. But what I actually want to talk about is what he decided to name it. He named it the Omni Ladybug something or other. That abbreviates to Otis. Why would he name it Otis? But back to the rest of the episode. There's a short conversation about who's in the rocket. Yuka-chan says it's probably not him, and Yumu responds with, no, you don't know that for sure, it could still be you. Luke-kun then shows up, and Yuhi and Yumu, obviously not knowing who he is, go, is that the Great King of Terror? Schrodinger informs him of who Luke-kun is, as Luke-kun goes back to his house with Yuga-chan. There's a funny scene with Luke-kun and Tiger. And Luke-kun says that the cat reminds him of Yuga-chan, which of course he is. But he's purposely not letting Luke-kun know that it's him. If he wanted Luke-kun to know that it was him, Luke-kun would have figured it out. Despite, being Luke-kun. We then get another scene from Sevens, the scene from the ending where Luke-kun, Roman-chan, and Gakuto-san are speeding down the road in the bike. And this time around, Luke-kun notices the Odos and goes, that cat. Roman and Gakuto are like, cats? What about cats? Lukun responds with, oh, it's nothing. Surprisingly enough, I think Lukun is starting to kind of figure out what's going on. The rocket's coming down, and they should give us the answer to the rather large question, who is in this rocket, next week. We also get confirmation that Yuga-chan actually wants to stay in the Go Rush time period. However, I think Lukun might throw a wrench into things by figuring things out. Which is surprising because, as I said, it's Lukun. If Yuga-chan's friend realizes that he's there, they're not going to let him leave again. Which may or may not be good, as I don't think him spending the rest of his life in a past time period is going to be good for anyone's mental health. If that happens, he's going to spend the rest of his life away from home and will not be able to go back to visit unless they figure out how to reliably time travel. The Seven's characters are going to have issues because he came back and then left them forever and didn't actually say goodbye to their faces, most likely. And the Go Rush characters are going to be worried about him and be like, shouldn't you have stayed in your own time period? Shouldn't you have stayed at home? And then there's the issue of him possibly changing history more than he already has, even though it doesn't seem to have actually changed anything from Sevens yet. So yeah, Yuga-chan should stay in his own time period. Or at the very least, after going back to the Go Rush time period and figuring out how to get all the Odos and everybody else that's been carded out of cat form, they should have to figure out how to reliably time travel and get Yuga-chan home. Because he clearly needs to go back to his own time period at some point. Also, a few more things I want to mention. We haven't seen Udius in a few episodes, even though he was mentioned in the last one, and we haven't seen Zuijo in a month. Udius wasn't in 61 or 62, even though he was mentioned in both episodes, which is completely reasonable considering he's the protag. And then there's Zuijo. He returned to Earth in 58, was in flashbacks in 59, was mentioned in 60 as not being on a ship, so assumingly still in Mutaba Town, and wasn't even mentioned in 61 or 62. And he's almost certainly not going to be in the next episode either. Where is he? We also haven't seen Rovian since episode 57, despite her being mentioned last episode. For Udius, I think it's fine. He's the protag, and he still doesn't need to be in every single episode, and he was mentioned in the last two anyway, so it's completely fine on his end. But I would like to know where Rovian and Zuijo are, especially Zuijo. As I've mentioned before, we are at a point of the show where we all want more from Zuijo. And they're not giving it to us, which is annoying. But anyway, that wraps up episode 62. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. Have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time for another Yu-Gi-Oh! Video.